The nice girl is dead. Starting today, I am your worst nightmare.
She stood at the altar in a $50,000 wedding dress, marrying a man she'd never kissed. A man chosen for her before she could even choose for herself. But what her father didn't know was that she'd already uncovered his secret. The real reason he was selling her like a business asset. And when she finally confronted him with the truth, he said 5 words that would shatter everything she believed about family. You were always the collateral. This is the story of a daughter who discovered she was never a child. She was a contract. And the man she thought would save her? He was part of the deal all along. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. How does a father look his daughter in the eye every single day, knowing he's already traded her future for his own gain? How does a mother stay silent while her child is being groomed for sacrifice? And when a young woman finally finds the courage to choose herself, what happens when the entire family turns into her enemy? Before we're done, you'll know exactly what it feels like to be raised as a pawn, to be loved conditionally, and to realize that the prison you grew up in was built by the people who were supposed to protect you. Let's go back to where it all began. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and if you looked at her life from the outside, it was perfect. Born into wealth, raised in a mansion with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, private tutors, writing lessons, summer vacations in Martha's Vineyard. But perfection always comes with a price. Her father, Robert Mitchell, was a self-made real estate developer who'd built an empire from nothing. The kind of man who walked into rooms and expected silence, demanded respect, controlled everything and everyone around him. To him, family wasn't about love or connection. It was about legacy, structure, power. And Sarah? She was his daughter, which meant in his eyes, she was an extension of his property, a piece on his chessboard to be moved according to his strategy. Her mother, Patricia, had once been a vibrant woman, a concert pianist who'd performed at Carnegie Hall in her 20s, a woman who loved art and literature and late-night conversations about philosophy. But 30 years of marriage to Robert had drained the music out of her. She barely smiled anymore, barely spoke unless spoken to. She'd stopped playing piano 15 years ago, and the Steinway grand in the living room sat like a beautiful corpse, gathering dust and memories. When Sarah would ask her, "Mom, are you happy?" Patricia would just touch her daughter's face with cold fingers and whisper, "Happiness isn't the goal, sweetheart. Security is, survival is." And Sarah would see something flicker in her mother's eyes, something that looked like a warning. Sarah had one ally in that house, her older brother, Marcus. Marcus was the golden child, the heir apparent, the son who would inherit the Mitchell empire and carry the family name into the next generation. He'd been groomed for this role since birth. Business school at Wharton, an MBA from Harvard, internships at the most prestigious firms in New York. But unlike his father, Marcus wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold or calculating. He had their mother's gentle heart hidden beneath the expensive suits and corporate polish. He loved his sister fiercely, protectively, in a way that often put him at odds with their father's expectations. When Robert would lash out at Sarah for speaking too freely at dinner, for having opinions about politics or business or anything outside what he deemed appropriate for a young woman, Marcus would subtly redirect the conversation. When she'd cry in her room after another lecture about knowing her place, about understanding that women in their family had certain roles to play, Marcus would sit outside her door and slide notes underneath. Notes that said, "You're more than what he says you are. Don't let him make you small." But even Marcus couldn't protect her from what was coming. Because at 16, Sarah met someone who changed everything. His name was Daniel Cooper, and he was nothing like the boys in her social circle. He wasn't the son of a business partner or a politician. He didn't summer in the Hamptons or winter in Aspen. Daniel was a scholarship student at her private school, a talented musician who played guitar at a local coffee shop on weekends to help pay for his books and supplies. He had kind eyes and calloused fingers and a way of seeing the world that made Sarah feel like she'd been living in black and white her entire life, and he was the first splash of color. They met in the school library. Sarah had been studying for a history exam, and Daniel had been reading poetry in the corner.
Pablo Neruda.
He'd looked up, caught her staring, and smiled. "You ever read Neruda?" he'd asked. Sarah had shaken her head. He'd slid the book across the table. "Start with this one. I can wait." And that's how it began. For 2 years, they built a secret world together. Coffee shops on the edge of town where no one from her father's circle would ever think to look. Long walks in parks where they could hold hands without being seen. Late-night phone calls where they'd talk until sunrise, about everything and nothing, about dreams and fears and all the things Sarah had never been allowed to want. Daniel never made her feel like she was too much or not enough. He never tried to change her or shape her into something more acceptable. He just loved her, completely, unconditionally. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt free. She felt seen. She felt like a person instead of a project, a human being instead of a trophy to be displayed on her father's shelf. But freedom is a dangerous thing when you're raised in a cage. And Robert Mitchell was always watching. Sarah didn't know it then, but her father had known about Daniel for 18 months. He'd had her followed, photographed, documented. He knew where they went, what they talked about, how Daniel looked at his daughter like she hung the moon. And Robert had been calculating, planning, waiting for the right moment to strike. Because 2 years before Sarah even met Daniel, Robert Mitchell had made a promise. A promise that involved his daughter. A promise she had no say in. A promise that would come due on her 18th birthday. And when that day arrived, everything Sarah thought she knew about her family would come crashing down around her. On Sarah's 18th birthday, her father threw a party. Not a celebration of her coming of age, not an acknowledgement of the young woman she'd become, but a carefully orchestrated business event disguised as a family gathering. The guests weren't her friends or people who actually cared about her. They were business associates, investors, colleagues, people who smiled with their mouths but never with their eyes, people who measured worth in dollar signs and connections. The Mitchell estate had been transformed for the occasion. White tents on the sprawling back lawn, a full orchestra, champagne fountains, ice sculptures, servers in crisp uniforms carrying trays of caviar and oysters. It was excessive and cold and perfectly on brand for Robert Mitchell. Everything had to project success, power, untouchable wealth. Sarah had been dressed by a stylist her mother had hired. A white designer gown that cost more than most people's cars. Hair and makeup done by professionals who'd worked on magazine covers and runways. She looked beautiful. She looked perfect. She looked exactly like the daughter Robert Mitchell wanted the world to see. But when Sarah looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. The party was already in full swing when he arrived. Jonathan Pierce, 26 years old, tall, conventionally handsome in that polished country club way. Harvard law graduate, junior partner at his father's firm. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost $10,000 and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sarah had met him once before, briefly, at some charity function her parents had dragged her to. He'd been polite but distant, forgettable. But tonight, he walked straight toward her like he owned the place, like he owned her. Sarah's father appeared at her elbow, his hand firm on her shoulder, his grip just tight enough to remind her that this wasn't optional. "Sarah, you remember Jonathan Pierce?"
Grégory Piercesson.
Jonathan extended his hand. She shook it, confused by the familiarity in his expression, by the way her father was watching this interaction like a director watching his actors hit their marks. "It's wonderful to see you again, Sarah. Happy birthday." Jonathan's voice was smooth, practiced. "Your father's told me so much about you." Before Sarah could respond, her father was steering them toward the dance floor. "You two should dance. Get to know each other better." And just like that, Sarah found herself in Jonathan's arms, swaying to music she didn't hear, surrounded by people she didn't know, in a moment that felt completely surreal. Jonathan made small talk, asked about her plans for college, complimented her dress, mentioned that he'd be seeing more of her, that their families would be spending quite a bit of time together. Sarah smiled and nodded and counted the minutes until she could escape, because all she could think about was Daniel. Sweet, genuine Daniel who was probably at the coffee shop right now, playing guitar for tips, completely unaware that Sarah's entire world was being rearranged without her consent. She'd texted him earlier, told him about the party. He'd sent back a simple message. Wish I could be there. Love you. That message felt like a lifeline in a sea of phoniness and performance. Sarah managed to slip away during dinner. She found a quiet corner of the garden, far from the tents and the music and the watchful eyes. She pulled out her phone and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Hey birthday girl, how's the fancy party? Sarah's voice cracked. Can you meet me? Now? There was no hesitation. Where? The old bridge. 20 minutes. Sarah hung up and took a breath. But before she could move, a voice cut through the darkness. Going somewhere? She turned. Her father stood in the shadows, perfectly still, perfectly controlled. His face was unreadable, but Sarah had known him long enough to recognize the cold fury underneath the calm exterior. Inside. Now, it wasn't a request. Robert Mitchell led his daughter to his study. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions he'd never read but had purchased because they looked impressive. This was his throne room, the place where he made deals and broke people and controlled every aspect of his carefully constructed empire. He closed the door, locked it, then he turned to face his daughter, and for the first time in her life, Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not anger, not disappointment, ownership. Sit down. Sarah sat. Her father walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. He placed it in front of her. Open it. Sarah's hands shook as she lifted the cover. Inside were photographs of her and Daniel, holding hands in the park, kissing outside the coffee shop, laughing together in his car. Dozens of them. Months of surveillance. Her father had been watching, documenting, building a file like she was a suspect in a crime. How long have you known? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. 18 months. Long enough. He sat down across from her, steepled his fingers, and delivered the news that would change everything. You will end your relationship with Daniel Cooper immediately. You will not see him, speak to him, or contact him in any way. And next summer you will marry Jonathan Pierce. This is not a discussion. This is what's happening. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. What? No, I don't even know him. You'll get to know him. The wedding is already being planned. I'm in love with someone else. Robert's expression didn't change. That boy is not your future. Jonathan is. This family's future depends on it. Sarah stood, anger finally overriding shock. You can't force me to marry someone.
I'm 18.
I have rights. Her father smiled. It wasn't kind. I'm not forcing you, Sarah. I'm telling you what's going to happen. And if you refuse, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? Robert leaned back in his chair. Daniel's father works in construction. Doesn't he? Union job. Good benefits. Be a shame if he suddenly lost that position. Be a shame if Daniel lost his scholarship. If his family lost their home. I know people, Sarah. People who owe me favors. People who can make lives very difficult. Sarah felt the room tilt. You wouldn't. Try me. Refuse this marriage, and I will systematically destroy everything and everyone that boy loves. His family will lose everything. He'll spend the rest of his life trying to dig himself out of the hole I put him in. And it will all be because of you. Because you were selfish. Because you chose puppy love over family responsibility. The cruelty of it took Sarah's breath away. Why? Why are you doing this? Because 5 years ago I made a mistake. A business mistake that nearly bankrupted this family. And Gregory Pierce saved us. He gave me a loan when no bank would touch me. $50 million. No interest. No timeline. And in return, I promised him something more valuable than money. Her father's eyes were cold. I promised him you. An alliance between our families. A merger through marriage. You were always part of the deal, Sarah. You were always the collateral. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her father's words playing on repeat. You were always the collateral. She felt like her entire life had been a lie. Every birthday party, every family dinner, every moment her father had smiled at her or told her he was proud, it had all been performance. She wasn't his daughter. She was his backup plan, his insurance policy. The next morning, Sarah did something she'd never done before. She started digging. She waited until her father left for work and her mother was occupied with her garden. Then she went into Robert's study. She knew his computer password. He'd used the same one for years, arrogant in his belief that no one in his family would dare invade his privacy. Sarah was about to prove him wrong. She started with his email, searched for anything related to Gregory Pierce. What she found made her sick. The correspondence went back 6 years. Long before Sarah had even heard Jonathan's name. Long before she'd met Daniel. Long before she'd had any idea that her future was being negotiated like a corporate merger. The first email was from Gregory Pierce to her father. Robert, I'm prepared to extend the loan you've requested. $50 million at 0 interest. But I want something in return. Let's discuss terms. Your daughter is how old now? 13? Perfect. My son will be finishing law school in a few years. I think a union between our families would be mutually beneficial. Let's plan accordingly. Sarah's hands shook as she read. She'd been 13, a child. And these men had already been planning her life like she was a chess piece. Her father's response was worse. Gregory, I appreciate your generosity. Sarah will make an excellent wife for Jonathan. She's being raised with the proper values. Obedient, well-mannered. She'll be an asset to your family. Let's formalize the arrangement. I'll have my attorney draft something. Sarah clicked through months of emails, updates on her progress, discussions about her education, her behavior, her appearance. Her father reporting to Gregory Pierce like a livestock breeder discussing a prized mare. She's doing well in school, top of her class. She's grown into a beautiful young woman. Jonathan will be pleased. Then 18 months ago, a shift in tone. Gregory, we have a situation. Sarah has become involved with an inappropriate boy. Local. No family connections. No money. I'm handling it, but I wanted you to know. I won't allow this to jeopardize our agreement. Gregory's response was swift. Understood. Do whatever's necessary. Jonathan is quite looking forward to the engagement. We've waited long enough. Sarah found the contract buried in a password-protected folder. It took her 40 minutes to crack the password, using every significant date she could think of until she finally tried the date of her birth. The file opened. It was a formal agreement, drafted by lawyers, signed by both Robert Mitchell and Gregory Pierce. The language was clinical, detached, discussing Sarah like she was property being transferred between owners. Party A, Robert Mitchell, agrees to the union of his daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, to Party B's son, Jonathan Gregory Pierce, upon Sarah's 18th birthday. In exchange, Party B will provide Party A with a personal loan of $50 million, interest-free, to be forgiven upon successful completion of the marriage. The marriage will take place no later than Sarah's 19th birthday. Should Party A fail to deliver on this agreement, the loan will become immediately due with 20% interest compounded annually. Sarah will be prepared for this union through appropriate education and guidance. She will be discouraged from inappropriate relationships or attachments that might interfere with the arrangement. The wedding will be a significant social event, befitting both families' status. There were more clauses, more details, but Sarah couldn't read anymore. She printed the document. Then she kept searching. She found her mother's signature on a separate document. An acknowledgement that Patricia Mitchell had been informed of the arrangement and consented to it. The date was 5 years ago. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Her mother had known. For 5 years, Patricia had known that her daughter was promised to a stranger, and she'd said nothing. She'd helped pick out Sarah's dresses, enrolled her in etiquette classes, taught her how to be the perfect hostess, all while knowing it was training for a marriage Sarah never agreed to. Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed everything, clearing the browser history and making sure nothing looked disturbed. Her brother Marcus appeared in the doorway. Hey, you okay? You look pale. Sarah turned to him, studying his face. Did you know? Marcus's expression shifted. Guilt flickered across his features. That was all the answer she needed. You knew. Marcus stepped into the room and closed the door. Sarah, I only found out a few months ago. Dad told me because he wanted me to help smooth things over with you. To help convince you it was a good idea. And you didn't tell me? I was trying to find another way. I was trying to talk him out of it. But Dad, he doesn't listen. Once he's made a decision, that's it. Sarah felt tears burning. You let me walk around thinking I had a future. Thinking I had choices. Marcus looked genuinely pained. I know. I'm sorry. I thought if I could just get him to see reason, if I could find a way to pay back the Pierce family, maybe we could get out of this without destroying you in the process. But it's $50 million, Sarah. I don't have that kind of money. And even if I did, Dad has his pride wrapped up in this now. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about his word, his reputation. To him, backing out would be admitting failure, and Robert Mitchell doesn't fail. Sarah wiped her eyes angrily. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept it? Just marry some stranger because Dad made a deal when I was a kid? Marcus sat down heavily. I don't know. But you need to understand something. If you run, if you refuse, Dad will follow through on his threats. I've seen him destroy people for less. He'll go after Daniel. He'll go after Daniel's family. He has the resources and the connections to make their lives a living hell. Sarah looked at her brother. Then help me. Help me find a way out of this that doesn't hurt anyone. Marcus met her eyes. I'm trying. I swear I'm trying. But I need you to be smart. I need you to not do anything rash. Play along for now. Buy me some time to figure this out. Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to burn the house down. But instead, she nodded slowly. Okay, I'll play along. But I'm not marrying Jonathan. I don't care what it costs. Marcus looked worried. Just be careful. Dad's not someone you want as an enemy. Sarah thought about the contract upstairs, the printed copy hidden in her room. Too late for that. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah became someone she didn't recognize. She smiled at Jonathan during their scheduled dates. She let him take her to expensive restaurants and talk about their future like it was inevitable. She attended dress fittings with her mother, pretending to care about lace patterns and necklines. She played the role of the obedient daughter so convincingly that even her father seemed to relax his guard. But every night, after everyone was asleep, Sarah was on her laptop. She was researching contract law, looking into what made agreements legally binding, trying to understand if there was any way to void a contract that treated a human being like transferable property. She found articles about forced marriage, about coercion, about consent. She learned that in most states you couldn't legally contract away another person's autonomy, that marriage required the willing participation of both parties, that a contract signed when she was 13 about a decision she'd be forced to make as an adult was potentially unenforceable. She found the name of a lawyer, a family law attorney in the city who specialized in cases involving parental coercion and financial abuse. She made an appointment using a fake name, paying cash she'd saved from birthday gifts and allowances. She brought the contract with her. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s named Margaret Hoffman, read through it carefully. Then she looked at Sarah with something like pity. This is unconscionable. It's also probably unenforceable. You can't sign away another person's right to choose their own spouse. That's not how contract law works, especially when the contract was made about a minor who had no say in the agreement. Sarah felt hope flicker. So I can just refuse? It's not binding? Margaret hesitated. Legally, you have every right to refuse. The contract can't force you to marry anyone. But, and this is important, the financial consequences for your father are real. If he fails to deliver on his end of this agreement, the loan becomes due immediately with interest. We're talking about $60 million, possibly more depending on how they calculate it. Your father could lose everything. His business, the house, your family's entire financial foundation. Sarah absorbed this. What about his threats? Against Daniel and his family? Margaret's expression hardened. Those would be illegal. Blackmail. Coercion. If he follows through, he could face criminal charges. But she paused, proving it would require evidence. And powerful men like your father are often very careful about leaving trails. Sarah pulled out her phone. She'd been recording every conversation with her father where he'd threatened her or Daniel, every discussion about the contract, every moment of coercion. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Smart girl. This changes things. With this evidence, you have leverage. If your father tries to retaliate, you can go to the authorities. You can also go public. Wealthy families hate scandals. The threat of exposure might be enough to make him back down. But Sarah, you need to understand what you're risking here. If you fight this, you're going to war with your own father. You're going to tear your family apart. Are you prepared for that? Sarah thought about Daniel, about the life they'd planned, about the future she wanted, not the one being forced on her, about the principle of the thing, about the idea that she was a human being with agency and rights and the ability to make her own choices. Yes, I'm prepared. Margaret nodded slowly. Then let's talk about strategy. Sarah spent the next month gathering more evidence. She recorded conversations. She made copies of emails. She documented every interaction with Jonathan, noting the times he'd mentioned things only her father could have told him. Private details about her life. Future plans that assumed her compliance. She built a case. But she also made a plan. Because Sarah had realized something important. Her father's power was built on reputation. On the image of the successful, respected businessman. On his standing in the community. On people's belief in his integrity and his word. And if she could shatter that image, she could break his hold over her. The wedding was scheduled for June 14th. For months after her 19th birthday. It was going to be massive. 300 guests. A cathedral ceremony. A reception at the most exclusive venue in the state. Her father had spared no expense. Because this wasn't just a wedding. It was a spectacle. A demonstration of the Mitchell family's power and prestige. An announcement to the world that Robert Mitchell kept his promises and honored his debts. Sarah had other plans. 2 weeks before the wedding, she met with a journalist. Not just any journalist, but an investigative reporter from a major newspaper who'd built her career on exposing corruption and abuse of power. Sarah gave her everything. The contract, the recordings, the emails, the evidence of coercion and manipulation. She told her story from beginning to end. The reporter, a woman named Claire Bennett, listened with increasing anger. This is horrifying. But it's also one hell of a story. If I run this, it's going to destroy your father's reputation. It's going to be everywhere. Are you absolutely sure? Sarah didn't hesitate. I'm sure. Run it. Claire looked at her carefully. When do you want it published? Sarah smiled for the first time in months. The morning of the wedding. Claire grinned. You're tougher than you look, kid. Okay, I'll have it ready. But Sarah, be prepared. The fallout is going to be intense. Your father won't take this lying down. I know, but I'm not his property. And it's time everyone else knew that too. The morning of June 14th dawned bright and clear. Perfect wedding weather. Sarah woke up at 5 in the morning and immediately checked her phone. The story had gone live an hour ago. The headline read, "Sold into Marriage. How one father traded his daughter to save his business empire." The article was devastating. It laid out everything. The contract, the loan, the surveillance of Sarah and Daniel, the threats, the coercion. It included excerpts from the recordings where Robert Mitchell explicitly stated that Sarah was collateral, that she had no choice, that he would destroy anyone who got in the way of his arrangement. It quoted the contract verbatim, showing how two grown men had negotiated the future of a 13-year-old girl like she was a commodity. The article had been shared thousands of times already. It was trending on social media. News outlets were picking it up. Sarah's phone started ringing at 5:30. Her father. She didn't answer. He called 6 more times in 10 minutes. Then her mother. Then Marcus. She silenced her phone and got dressed. Not in her wedding dress, but in jeans and a simple shirt. She packed a bag with essentials. Then she waited. At 7 o'clock, her bedroom door slammed open. Her father stood there, his face purple with rage, his hands shaking. What did you do? His voice was deadly quiet. Sarah stood. I told the truth. You destroyed me. You destroyed this family. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, gone because of your selfishness. Sarah kept her voice calm. You destroyed yourself when you decided I was something you could sell. That's not how families work. That's not how love works. Robert stepped closer, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might actually hit her. But then Marcus appeared behind him, physically placing himself between them. Dad, stop. This isn't helping. Robert whirled on his son. You knew about this? Marcus met his father's eyes. Not about the article. But yeah, I knew she was planning to fight back. And honestly, good for her. You went too far. You're supposed to be on my side. I'm on Sarah's side. I'm on the side of not treating people like property. What you did was wrong, Dad. It was always wrong. Robert looked between his children like he didn't recognize them. The Pierce family is threatening to sue. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. My attorneys are telling me this could lead to criminal charges. All because you couldn't just do what was expected of you. Sarah shook her head. No. All because you made a deal you had no right to make. I was a child. You decided my entire future without asking me, without caring what I wanted, without even considering that I might be a person with my own dreams and plans and desires. You treated me like I was a business asset. So yes, I fought back. And I'd do it again. Patricia appeared in the hallway, her face pale. Sarah, the guests are already arriving at the church. The wedding is in 3 hours. What are we supposed to tell them? Tell them the truth. Tell them the wedding's canceled because the bride refused to be sold. Robert's voice was ice. If you walk away from this, you walk away from everything. This family, this house, your trust fund, your education, everything. I'll cut you off completely. You'll have nothing. Sarah had been prepared for this. I know, and I'm okay with that, because nothing is better than being owned. Robert stared at her. Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. No more arguments. No more threats. He simply left, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Patricia stood frozen. Then she did something Sarah never expected. She started crying. Not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, baby. I should have protected you. I should have fought for you. But I was so scared. I've been scared for so long. Sarah went to her mother. What are you talking about? Patricia looked at her daughter with red, swollen eyes. I was you. 30 years ago, I was exactly you. My father sold me to your father to pay off gambling debts. I was 22. I just graduated from Juilliard. I was going to be a concert pianist. I had a whole life planned. And then my father told me I was marrying Robert Mitchell, a man I'd met twice, a man 20 years older than me who saw me as a trophy wife and a useful connection to the arts community. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. You never told me. How could I? How could I tell you that the same thing that happened to me was going to happen to you? I thought if I just went along with it, if I just kept quiet and played my role, maybe your life would be different. Maybe Robert would love you more than he loved me. Maybe you'd be spared. Patricia's voice broke. But he didn't spare you. He did the exact same thing to you that my father did to me. And I let it happen because I was too broken to fight. Sarah hugged her mother, both of them crying now. It's not your fault. Mom, it's not your fault. But Patricia shook her head. It is. I'm your mother. I should have stood up for you. I should have left him years ago. I should have taken you and Marcus and run. But I was so trapped in my own fear, in my own learned helplessness, that I couldn't see a way out. Watching you fight back, watching you refuse to accept what I accepted, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen. And it's woken something up in me that I thought died a long time ago. Marcus had been standing silently in the doorway. He spoke quietly. Mom, are you saying what I think you're saying? Patricia straightened, wiping her eyes. I'm saying I'm done. I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking half of whatever's left after this scandal destroys your father's business. And I'm going to start living the life I should have lived 30 years ago. Sarah, I can't undo the past. I can't give you back the childhood you deserved, with parents who put your happiness first. But I can make sure you have a future where you're free, where you make your own choices, where you're never, ever treated like property again. Sarah held her mother's hand. Where will you go? Patricia smiled, and it was the first real smile Sarah had seen on her mother's face in years. I don't know. Maybe back to New York. Maybe I'll start playing piano again. Maybe I'll find out who Patricia Reynolds was supposed to be before she became Mrs. Robert Mitchell. The sound of cars pulling up outside interrupted them. Sarah looked out the window. News vans. Reporters. The story was everywhere, and now they wanted footage, comments, reactions. Marcus swore softly. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Sarah squared her shoulders. Let them come. I'm not hiding. I didn't do anything wrong. And neither did Mom. The only person who should be ashamed is Dad. Over the next few hours, chaos reigned. Jonathan Pierce arrived at the house, looking shell-shocked. He found Sarah in the living room. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the full extent of it. My father told me you'd agreed, that your family wanted this as much as mine. If I'd known it was forced, if I'd known about the threats. Sarah studied him. Would it have made a difference? Would you have walked away from the deal? Jonathan hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. Sarah nodded. That's what I thought. You should go. Jonathan left. 20 minutes later, Gregory Pierce himself showed up, threatening lawsuits and demanding the return of his $50 million. Marcus handled him, calmly explaining that their attorneys would be in touch, and that any further harassment would be documented and used as evidence of continued coercion. Gregory left, furious and impotent, his carefully laid plans crumbling around him. Robert Mitchell spent the day locked in his study, making phone calls, trying to do damage control. But the story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just about one family anymore. It had become a national conversation about parental control, about consent, about the ways wealthy families sometimes treated their children as assets rather than human beings. Women's rights groups were citing it as an example of modern-day marriage trafficking. Legal experts were discussing whether contracts like the one Robert had signed should be criminally prosecuted. Psychologists were talking about the long-term damage of treating children as pawns in business deals. Sarah gave one interview, just one, to Claire Bennett, the reporter who'd broken the story. She sat in front of the camera and spoke calmly, clearly, about what it felt like to discover you'd been promised to a stranger before you were old enough to understand what marriage meant. About the fear and the anger and the eventual decision to fight back, no matter the cost. I'm one of the lucky ones, Sarah said. I had resources. I had some education. I had a brother who supported me and eventually a mother who found her own courage. But how many girls are in situations like this and don't have those advantages? How many are being coerced into marriages or relationships or life paths they never chose because their parents treat them like property? That has to change. We have to start seeing children as people, not as extensions of their parents' egos or tools for their parents' ambitions. The interview went viral. Sarah became, overnight, an unintentional spokesperson for a movement she hadn't meant to start. Young women reached out to her, sharing their own stories of parental coercion, of being forced into careers they hated to please their fathers, of being pushed into relationships with people their families approved of having their lives planned out without their input. Sarah read every message, and she started to understand that her fight wasn't just about her anymore. The legal fallout was swift and severe. Gregory Pierce did sue, demanding the immediate return of the $50 million plus interest. Robert Mitchell countersued, claiming that the contract was void because it had been obtained under false pretenses and involved the coercion of a minor. The case dragged through the courts for 8 months. In the end, a judge ruled that while the loan itself was legitimate and needed to be repaid, the clause involving Sarah's marriage was unenforceable and potentially criminal. The judge ordered Robert to repay $30 million immediately, with the remaining $20 million plus interest to be paid over 10 years. It effectively bankrupted the Mitchell empire. Robert had to sell properties, liquidate assets, downsize everything. The mansion went on the market, the vacation homes, the art collection, the cars. Everything that had represented the Mitchell family's wealth and status was auctioned off to pay the debt Robert had incurred trying to trade his daughter for financial salvation. Patricia filed for divorce and, as promised, took half of what remained. It wasn't much, maybe $2 million after all the debt was settled, but it was enough. She bought a small apartment in New York City. She started taking piano lessons again, relearning pieces she'd played 30 years ago, rediscovering the joy of music. She joined a community orchestra. She made friends. She started painting. She began, slowly and painfully, to heal from 3 decades of living as someone else's possession. Marcus made a decision that shocked everyone, including himself. He walked away from the family business entirely. He'd always been good with numbers, good with strategy, but he'd never actually wanted to be Robert Mitchell's heir. He'd just never been given permission to want anything else. Now, with everything falling apart anyway, he gave himself that permission. He got a job at a nonprofit that helped at-risk youth. The pay was a fraction of what he'd made at Mitchell Development, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. Something that helped people instead of just enriching them. He and Sarah grew closer. He apologized over and over for not fighting harder or sooner. Sarah forgave him because she understood the complexity of being raised by someone like Robert Mitchell. The way manipulation can look like love. The way control can masquerade as protection. The way you can be trapped by loyalty to someone who's never actually been loyal to you. Robert Mitchell became a cautionary tale. His business contacts abandoned him. His social circle shrank to nothing. People who'd attended his parties and laughed at his jokes and competed for his attention suddenly couldn't remember his name. He ended up in a modest condo, working as a consultant, a shadow of his former self. Sarah never spoke to him again. Not because she was cruel, but because he never apologized. Never acknowledged what he'd done wrong. Never saw her as anything other than a disappointment, a failed investment, a daughter who destroyed everything by refusing to be obedient. And Sarah realized that some people are so committed to their worldview, so invested in their belief that they're always right, that they can't see the harm they've caused even when it's destroying them. And Daniel? Sarah called him the day after the wedding that never happened. She told him everything, every detail she'd kept from him to protect him from her father's threats. She expected him to be angry, to feel betrayed that she hadn't trusted him with the truth. But Daniel just listened. And when she finished, he said, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud that you fought for yourself, that you refused to let anyone, even your own father, tell you who you had to be." Sarah cried with relief. "I was so scared you'd be angry." Daniel's voice was gentle. "How could I be angry? You protected me. You fought a battle you shouldn't have had to fight. And you won. That takes courage I can't even imagine." They talked for hours. About the future. About what came next. Sarah told him, "I don't have money anymore. I don't have the life I used to have. My father cut me off. I'm basically starting over with nothing." And Daniel laughed. "Sarah, I never wanted you for your money. I wanted you because you're brilliant and kind and you see the world in ways that make me want to be better. The fact that you're now free to actually build the life you want, that's everything. So what do we do now?" They took it slow. Sarah moved into a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. She got a job waitressing while she figured out what she wanted to study. She'd never had to think about it before because her education had always been aimed at making her a suitable wife for someone like Jonathan. Now she could choose. She took classes at the community college, discovered she loved psychology, started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women escape controlling situations. She found purpose in turning her pain into something useful, something that might prevent other girls from going through what she'd gone through. Daniel kept playing music. He got a better gig at a local venue, started writing songs. Some of them were about Sarah, about fighting for love against impossible odds. His music got attention. He was asked to open for bigger acts. His career started to build, not because of connections or money, but because he was genuinely talented and worked incredibly hard. They moved in together after a year. A small apartment with terrible water pressure and neighbors who fought too loud. But it was theirs. They'd chosen it. No one had forced them or manipulated them or traded favors to put them there. 3 years after the wedding that never happened, Daniel proposed. Not with a $50,000 ring or an elaborate production. Just the two of them on a beach at sunset, and he asked her to marry him because he loved her and wanted to build a life together. Sarah said yes because she wanted the same thing. Because this time it was her choice. The wedding was small. 40 people. Mostly friends, Daniel's family, Marcus, and Patricia. They got married on a Saturday afternoon in a garden. With music, Daniel's friends played live and flowers that cost $300 total. Patricia cried through the whole ceremony. Afterward, she hugged Sarah tight and whispered, "This is what it's supposed to look like. This is what I should have had. This is what every person deserves." Sarah hugged her back. "You can still have it, Mom. It's not too late to choose happiness." Patricia smiled. "I'm working on it, sweetheart. I'm working on it." Sarah started a blog. She wrote about her experience, about what it was like to be raised as collateral, about the process of deprogramming yourself from a lifetime of being told your worth was in your obedience. The blog got attention. People shared it. Media outlets reached out. And eventually, Sarah was asked to speak at events, to talk to groups of young women about autonomy and choice and the importance of setting boundaries with family members who see you as extensions of themselves rather than as separate people. She wrote a book. Took 2 years and it was hard, reliving all of it, putting it into words that other people could understand. But it was also healing. The book was called Collateral and it became a bestseller. Not because Sarah was famous or connected, but because her story resonated. Because there were thousands of people out there who'd felt like their lives weren't their own, who'd been controlled or manipulated or coerced by parents or partners or systems that treated them as less than fully human. The book gave them language for their experiences. It gave them permission to fight back. Sarah used the money from the book to start a foundation, the Collateral Project. It provided legal assistance, counseling, and financial support to young people trying to escape controlling family situations. It helped kids who'd been disowned for being gay, girls who'd been forced into marriages, young adults whose parents had stolen their identities or their money. Anyone who needed help breaking free from people who claimed to love them but treated them like possessions. Marcus joined the board. So did Patricia. So did Margaret Hoffman, the lawyer who'd first helped Sarah understand her legal options. They built something good out of something that had been intended to destroy Sarah's autonomy. They turned pain into purpose. 5 years after the wedding that never was, Sarah and Daniel had their first child. A daughter. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented. Hope that the cycle could be broken, that children could be raised to believe they owned themselves, that their lives were their own to shape, that love didn't come with conditions or contracts or collateral. Sarah held her daughter and made promises, that she would never be sold or traded or used as a bargaining chip, that her worth wouldn't be measured in who she married or what she could provide to the family name, that she would be seen and heard and valued for exactly who she was, whoever that turned out to be, that her choices would be her own. Patricia visited often. She'd hold her granddaughter and sing to her, and sometimes Sarah would catch her mother crying. Happy tears this time. Tears for the life Patricia had finally built, 35 years later than she should have, but built nonetheless. Marcus had met someone too. A teacher named Rebecca who had no idea who the Mitchells were and didn't care about money or status. She loved Marcus for his kindness, his quiet strength, his determination to be nothing like his father. They were talking about getting married. Marcus asked Sarah to help him plan the proposal. He wanted to get it right. He wanted Rebecca to know, beyond any doubt, that he was choosing her freely, joyfully, without any ulterior motives or family pressure or business arrangements. He wanted it to be pure. And Robert? Sarah heard about him occasionally. Through Marcus, who maintained minimal contact out of a sense of obligation he was still trying to shake. Robert had remarried. A much younger woman who reminded Sarah uncomfortably of her mother at that age. Another transaction disguised as romance. He was trying to rebuild his business, but the scandal had marked him. People remembered. The internet doesn't forget. Whenever his name came up in business contexts, so did the articles about the daughter he'd tried to sell. He would never fully recover the power and prestige he'd once had. Sarah didn't feel sorry for him. She'd processed her anger in therapy, worked through the betrayal and the hurt and the complicated grief of losing a father she'd never really had in the first place. She'd forgiven him in the sense that she'd stopped letting his actions control her emotional state. But she didn't miss him. She didn't want him in her life. And she'd made peace with the fact that some relationships, even parental ones, are healthier when they end. The question Sarah got asked most often in interviews and at speaking events was whether she regretted it. Whether she wished she'd just gone through with the wedding, kept the money, lived the comfortable life. Whether fighting back had been worth the cost. Her answer was always the same. Every single day, I wake up next to someone I chose. I work on projects I care about. I make decisions based on what I think is right, not what someone else has decided for me. I have a daughter who will grow up knowing she owns herself. Yes, I lost money. I lost a relationship with my father. I lost the life I was supposed to have. But I gained something more valuable. I gained myself. And that's worth everything. She would pause, making eye contact with whoever had asked. The life I was supposed to have wasn't mine. It was a script someone else wrote. And I don't care how comfortable the cage is, it's still a cage. I'd rather build my own life from scratch than live in luxury that came with the price tag of my autonomy. So here's my question for you. If you were Sarah, could you have done it? Could you have stood in front of everyone you knew and burned your entire life down to be free? Could you have walked away from money and status and your family name to choose yourself? Or would you have walked down that aisle, married the stranger, and spent the rest of your life wondering what if? What if you'd been brave enough to fight? What if you'd valued yourself more than you valued comfort? What if you'd believed you deserved to make your own choices? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the invisible cages people live in every single day, if it made you question the ways families sometimes control their children under the guise of love, hit that subscribe button. Because next week, I'm going to tell you about a woman who discovered her entire family had been lying to her about her inheritance for 20 years. And when she finally found out the truth, she made them pay for every single lie. I'm Fireside Tales.